We are witnessing the biggest militarization drive since World War II. Hundreds of billions of dollars are being earmarked for the military, for arms manufacturing. They say that this is necessary for defense, that this will boost the economy. But this is a colossal waste of money, and we, the working class, will be made to pay for it. Actually, we already are through layoffs in the public sector, through austerity measures, through cuts to social services across the country. This is why communists say no to Carney's militarization plan. So this week, I am joined by Holly Quilty from the Executive Committee of the Revolutionary Communist Party, and we are going to discuss Carney's militarization plan and what it means for Canada, what it means for the class struggle in Canada. Welcome back to the podcast, Holly.
Thanks, Joel.
So maybe we can start with first why this is happening.
Yeah. Well, I was reading some quotes in the press, in the government statements about the recent defense industrial strategy that the government announced, which I think we'll talk about later. But I think one of the quotes illustrates a lot of it, to be honest. It says, "Long-held assumptions have been upended about the end of imperial conquest, the durability of peace in Europe, and the resilience of old alliances. In this uncertain world, it's more important than ever that Canada possess the capacity to sustain its own defense and safeguard its own sovereignty." So this is from a government statement about this defense industrial strategy. And I think this brings up a lot of the main sort of elements of this situation that you have, and you can look around the world and witness this, obviously, the complete sort of upending of everything that previously seemed stable and solid. What's been called, I think, frequently lately, the rules-based international order, which included, of course, a certain dominance by the Western imperialist countries like Canada and the US. And all of the global relations that came with that have really all been upended. And there's been kind of a fracturing of world relations between different powers. And in the result of this is, a rise in obviously in conflict, in war. We've seen that with the Ukraine war. Obviously, the latest is, of course, the war in Iran, the bombing of Iran. There's, I think, now something like 25 conflicts going on, violent conflicts across the world between wars, civil war, genocide.
The whole Middle East is in conflict now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe 25 is too small an estimate at this moment. And the result is that all across the world, you see a drive towards rearmament, towards preparations for military conflict. And Canada's not immune from this, of course. So the European powers have been doing this, rushing to the 5% of GDP mark of military spending. Germany, France, Britain, at a tremendous pace, considering that no one was discussing this a few years ago, or only distantly discussing it. And then for Canada, there's a sort of an enhanced element, which is present for other powers, but especially for Canada, that Canada needs the U.S. It's been talked about many times on this podcast. Canada needs the U.S., this incredibly important trading partner for Canada that cannot easily be replaced. And so Canada needs to play its part in the U.S.'s sort of grand strategy, the geopolitics of the U.S. in order to appease the U.S., appease Trump, and attempt to get some type of deal. And I think when you look into it and you look into the statements of Carney, for example, at Davos, where he talks about this, the death of the old world order, and the position of middle powers like Canada in that world order, a lot of this becomes clear and becomes revealed.
Yeah, so I think that kind of hits on the big picture, which is this massive shift. Canada benefited a lot from this international, or Canadian, let's put it this way, Canadian capitalism benefited a lot from the international rules-based order. There was the so-called peace dividend that we'll deal with a bit later, where they didn't spend money on military. They could spend it elsewhere, on capital investments or on welfare programs, on state welfare programs. But now that is gone out the window. The 5% military spending that you mentioned, I remember when that was generally considered in the media, in the mainstream, some kind of loony Donald Trump idea that he was saying that everyone else thought was batshit crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Now it is the accepted target of Canada, America, Europe. All the Western imperialist countries are all rushing to this. I will add that Mark Carney, in the election last year, around this time or a little bit later, about a year ago, did not run on this. He ran on increasing military spending to 2% of GDP by 2030. Now, after he got elected, conveniently after he was already elected, then he committed to raise military spending to 5% and to raise it by 2% last year, which I believe they did reach that target through a massive increase in military spending. So, I will make the point, very undemocratic. No one voted on that. He didn't run on increase into 5%. He ran on increase to 2%. But yeah, the budget last fall had in it around $81.8 billion in military spending. This is, as I mentioned in the intro, largest sustained militarization campaign in the Canadian economy since the Second World War. And I think, as you said, a lot of people see this as, we need the military to fight against Trump. It's like, no, this is a capitulation to Trump's pressure, and Trump basically saying to the Canadians, you need to protect yourself, and you need to work with us to protect, in particular, the Arctic. There's Arctic security. That's a big one. It's a whole bunch of essentially what is unprotected coastline. The melting of the ice can lead to open trade routes, and there's multiple countries, including Russia, that they're obviously very worried about, the Western imperialist countries. So this is the situation, and Donald Trump's made it very clear, we're not going to protect you anymore. Whereas previously, to be honest, Canadian capitalism was essentially relying on the American military might. This is the situation of why this is happening. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add on to that.
Yeah, just a quick thing to add. Sometimes the Arctic stuff just gets talked about in really vague terms, but it's a very concrete thing for these countries. You have the opening up of trade routes, as you just mentioned. There's also the possibility of flight routes opening up because as it gets warmer, it's like safer to fly over it in case of plane crashes. Right. Anyone who controls this would benefit massively, of course. And Russia is actually way ahead in terms of their icebreaker fleet, their submarine fleet, way ahead of the Western countries and the Western alliance. And so this is a kind of a critical battleground that the U.S. wants to keep up in, and they want Canada to play its role. And I think this is why so much of the spending goes towards things that are for the Arctic. Icebreakers, there's some billions for that. How much was it again? $9.7 billion for destroyers and $22 billion for icebreakers. Yeah. There are also submarines, of course. The estimates for that are around $40 billion. They're also buying like radar systems for $3 or $4 billion, which are going to be for the north. It's also planes. You get the point. But so a lot of this is really focused on the Arctic and the developing conflict there.
Yeah. So, okay, I could see a lot of people say, well, we need to do that because Russia's very scary. Look what they're doing in Ukraine. And so they could attack us. I know there's been a lot of stuff in the press of Russia's going to attack Europe. They could attack Canada maybe in the north or something, or there could be a conflict and we need to be ready for that. So normally I don't support military spending, but we need it for defense to protect the country. But I guess I would pivot to, what is the cost of this?
Yes.
We said the numbers here. It's quite massive. Just in the budget last fall, there was almost $82 billion rolled out. Normally, the military budget was around 40, so this is already a doubling. But what is this going to mean for life in Canada? I guess I'll say it for working class people. Do you want to?
I think this is the essential question, really. You could summarize it by a massive hole in the government budget. Already the increase of more than 10 billion just this year in the budget for this year is tremendous. I think I looked it up, the healthcare transfers from the federal government to the provinces for healthcare were 54 billion last year. And so 10 billion extra, that's already 20% obviously of the healthcare spending. But the plan to get to 5% of GDP, which by the way, they're saying they're going to do by 2030. So that's very close. That will mean more than 100 billion. Depending which outlets you talk to, it could be as much as 150 billion being spent on military spending. So that's more than healthcare. Actually, it's more than every federal transfer for every social program in the whole country, which is around 104 billion.
More than it all combined, yeah.
Exactly. And considering that the government deficit is already historically high, it's the highest it's ever been in a non-pandemic year. And they don't seem to have any, specific plans to raise revenue or anything like that. And they certainly don't want to. By revenue, of course, I mean taxes mainly. This is going to be either massive austerity or tons and tons of extra government debt, which at some point still has to be paid. So it's austerity at the end of the day as well. So that means cuts like we've never seen to healthcare, to education, which is already being cut by the provinces, but the pressure will just be ratcheted up times 10 with massive cuts from the federal government. It could be cuts to public sector jobs, obviously, that are part of the federal government.
We've already seen 40,000 jobs cut in the last budget. Yeah,
exactly. So honestly, a complete upending of the Canadian sort of welfare state, social contract, whatever's left of it is now going to be on the chopping block.
Yeah, so this is what is known as guns versus butter.
That's a quote from Joseph Goebbels, I think.
Is it?
Yeah, he said guns before butter. That's our policy.
Yes. Okay, so the Nazis argued guns before butter. I think most Canadians would say, well, butter, we need to live. And now Carney's trying to say guns and butter. But what do serious people have to say about this? Let's just read some analysis from, I think, serious analysts. There's this organization in Canada called the NATO organization.
Association,
This association. I wonder what they do. They're a bunch of business people and analysts and academics that are basically a pro-NATO lobby group.
Yeah.
I don't know
pro-military spending.
Yeah, I don't know entirely why they exist because Canada's a pretty stalwart defender of NATO. Maybe they feel like they're not stringent enough in their military spending. But yeah, so this is what the NATO Association says. They're obviously in favor of the militarization. They like it. But this is what they say it will mean. They say this increase in military spending must either come from raising taxes or cutting spending in other areas. Given that taxes create all sorts of negative economic incentives, combined with the reality that Canadians already struggle under heavy tax burdens, curbing government spending in other areas seems to be the only viable option, creating a macroeconomic trade-off best known as guns versus butter, meaning you spend money on military, you're going to have to cut. So they continue, defense spending takes away from social spending, such as welfare, healthcare, education, vice versa, etc. So it's not something that some communists are saying. This is what they're saying. The government doesn't like to frame it that way because if you think about it politically, if Mark Carney said, look, guys, you're not going to be able to have good things anymore. We're going to have to cut it so we can fund the military. I think more people would oppose it. But the way that they phrase it is military spending, we need it for defense, and you're going to get really good jobs, and we're not really going to cut a lot of things. And in that, polls show that most Canadians support the so-called defense spending, the military spending. But if you put it in stark terms where your life is going to get far, far worse in order to fund the military, I think most Canadians would oppose this.
Yeah, there was that one poll that said I think it was 72% are in
Yeah.
favor of increasing the military spending.
Yeah, it was an Ecos poll, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the highest number of any poll that I've seen, but all of them are above 60%.
Yeah.
But there was one very interesting poll that I think reveals the way people think about this, which basically asked people to rate how important it was to them that the military spending benefits the economy. So like how much should we balance just getting the best equipment versus how much should we, prioritize buying Canadian, building the Canadian economy,
creating
and all
jobs.
of that.
And,
Exactly. And the average was like 7.2, where 10 meant you support jobs and 0 was just buy whatever. So, and then...
So the vast majority of people actually prioritize the economic benefits.
That's exactly what it means. And more people said it's all about jobs than any other response. So I think that's revealing, obviously, that this is in many people's minds conditional on it creating jobs, on helping the economy. And obviously when people are suffering, when the economy is in such a crisis, this makes perfect sense. And this has been the general discussion, I think, in the press. Really, like if you read any outlets, the National Post, the Globe and Mail, so that's the left, the liberals, that is, the right wing, they all are basically debating what is the best way to equip the military and what is the best way to help the economy, considering that we're going to spend this money. And you can find endless articles and quotes debating this, but they all accept the basic premise that we have to spend more and more and much more on the military. And every single quote will say, this is for sovereignty, this is for defense, and so on. And so it's like the establishment, if you will, is all taking this exact position that we must spend this money and we're going to try to help the economy with it. But
yeah. So normally there's these free market people that go around arguing debt is bad and the government is too in debt. Every time you say, well, we should fund more money for healthcare, more money for education, good jobs, good benefits, better pensions, where are you going to get the money for that? Where are you going to get the money for that? We don't have money. You crazy communists. You think money grows on trees. Here, I'm in my 40s. I have never seen this amount of money being doled out like this so willy-nilly. I guess during the pandemic, they rolled out hundreds of $billions that they mostly gave to corporations. So they don't have a problem turning on the taps of government money if it goes to something that the imperialists need. So they're fine rolling out hundreds of $billions to spend it on military to protect the interests of Canadian capitalism, which ultimately this is what this is. But it's an astounding amount of money that they would never, it's like pulling teeth to get them to do that for something that's going to benefit working class people. But they have the contradiction, as you've addressed here, that working class people, they defend their interests. So this is why Carney is walking a fine line, arguing for military spending, but trying to make people think that it's in their interest when it ultimately isn't. It's actually the opposite. So to continue this NATO association that I was quoting from, I think I would continue the quote because I think it's quite interesting. It's this article they wrote, and it says, Canada, simply put, is a butter nation, meaning that Canada, after World War II, especially after the Korean War, they shifted their money out of military spending and into what they're talking about. This is what they're talking about, into social welfare programs. So what they say, since the end of the Cold War, Canada has enthusiastically adopted the peace dividend concept, resulting in a dramatic reduction in defense spending in favor of expanding social programs and implementing tax cuts. Over time, social safety nets have become woven into the Canadian identity and culture, almost to the point of federal overreach. What they mention is federal overreach. That's a funny term. They basically say national dental care, pharmacare, and daycare is federal overreach. That the federal government shouldn't be giving good things to working class families. That's federal overreach. Of course, military spending, well, that's fine. Corporate welfare, that's not federal overreach, right? But just gives you the picture is that they're complaining. Basically, they're complaining that Canadians like their social programs and that this is unsustainable. And this is how they conclude here. They say an increase to 5% of GDP military spending likely means that the well-loved programs will have to go, at least temporarily. That's what they add is, don't worry, you might be screwed, but not forever. And so, yeah, we've already, as we mentioned, we've already seen, I think, very, very beginning of cuts, both federally and provincially, as you're seeing right now. So, yeah, that's what this means internally. It's this massive increase in military spending will come at a cost to every working class person. So it's not just, oh, do you agree with military spending? Sure. It's do you agree that you are going to suffer? They're not asking corporate Canada to pay for this. Corporate Canada is laughing. They are going to make billions off of the military industry. Working class people are going to foot the bill. That's what this means as they build a military industrial complex or attempt to in Canada. So, yeah, did you have anything else to add on to that? Or?
No, not really.
Well, maybe we could move on to, I think we can briefly say, what's the response to this? I guess what's the left, if we want to call it that, the left. What's the left saying to this? Because this is astounding. It's the biggest militarization drive. Generally, the left is anti-imperialist, pro-peace, against war, right? But what's, for example, what's the NDP saying about this?
Yeah. Well, you have the NDP defense critic, Lori Idlout.
Ex-NDP now. She just crossed the floor to the Liberals.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she did.
Okay, that's very, very notable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, she put out a statement about this a little while ago in late February when they announced this new defense industrial strategy. And it says, among other things, Canadians are united in standing up to Donald Trump and to making the necessary investments in defense that will help protect our sovereignty and our economy.
Yeah.
We know that those investments, from boosting domestic production, supporting Canadian procurement, investing in Arctic sovereignty, and ensuring investments that have dual uses, and so on, all of this will come with costs. The threats of ours and our Arctic neighbor Greenland's sovereignty by the U.S. cannot be ignored. But boosting defense spending to 5% of Canada's GDP is an unprecedented target, which was never mentioned in the election campaign, very true, and could impact the investments needed in other critical areas from housing to healthcare to renewable energy. So I think this is sort of raising a lot of what we've been saying already. But she goes on, the strategy, referring to the defense industrial strategy, this strategy rightly identifies that Canadian sovereignty requires our ownership and control of intellectual property, software, maintenance, and sustainment systems for our military assets. That's why the New Democrats have already called on the government to cancel our purchase of F-35 fighter jets and reject delivery of the initial tranche. And it goes on
they're opposing the fighter jets, right?
Yeah, exactly. It goes on to explain the problems with the F-35, and it calls the purchase of the F-35s Carney caving to American pressure, and that it would give Trump too much power over us to shut down our jets, and so on. So, of course, these are completely correct critiques. But what position did the NDP take on these fighter jets?
Yeah, well, they're opposed to I remember when the F-35s was first being debated. It was
years ago.
It was a Harper thing.
I think I was 14.
It was a Harper thing. I remember it was in the 2011 election where the NDP made big waves. They opposed the fighter jets. By the way, so did the Liberals, opportunistically. And that was in 2011. Now they're still don't have them. This is ridiculous in terms of the whole process. They've been going back and forth on it. The NDP opposed it. Now they're opposing it. Oh, good. They're opposing it. But when you read them, they're not opposing it. They're saying, don't buy F-35s, buy the Gripen from Sweden, the Saab Gripen. So buy the Swedish jet. So we're not opposed to massive military spending, which how much are these fighter jets going to cost, by the way? Do you have the number?
27.7 billion.
27.7. That's about half the healthcare transfer of 1 year.
Yes.
On fighter jets.
It's basically exactly
on
half.
88 fighter jets. Well, by the way, they're musing increasing that to 125 fighter jets.
Yes.
New fighter jets.
Yeah, exactly.
I think some people have suggested that they do half-seas, half the Gripen, half the F-35. That seems like a stupid position. The NDP doesn't oppose it. They just support getting Swedish fighter jets. But I noticed one thing.
That was what they said during the election campaign, right?
They get the Swedish ones?
Yeah.
I don't remember. But I know they're saying that now.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, I think one thing that we see with the NDP is, as is evidence, I think, from what you read from, what's her name, Lori? Idlout, is a two-sidedness, or a trying to have your cake and eat it too. Is that they want to appear as opposing it while actually not fully opposing it. So in another statement, they said, so in that statement, it's funny. They say this is you need to invest in the military in order to stand up to Donald Trump and protect sovereignty. In another statement, they said this increase to 5% of GDP is a clear attempt to appease Donald Trump. So what is it? Are they appeasing Donald Trump, or are they standing up to Donald Trump?
And the thing about the jets is also very contradictory, because they said we need to have our intellectual property in our control, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. How is buying a Swedish jet any different from that point of view?
Swedes are very nice people, don't you know?
Well, I'm sure that's true, but
okay.
Still, you see the point.
No, obviously.
Yeah, and the statement I was referring to, it ends by saying, Canadians are ready to step up against President Trump's attacks on our sovereignty and the sovereignty of our allies. Canadians want a defense industrial strategy that supports our allies and gives us independence from the U.S. Yep. So it's a very correct critique of much of what the government is doing, and even pointing out the effects on the working class and so on. But at the same time, accepting that this spending is required in one way or another. And
the whole thing about with allies against the threats of the U.S., this is Carney's Davos speech. So if you want to know why the NDP did so bad in the election and are largely seen as irrelevant by most people, it's because they fundamentally are saying almost nothing different than Mark Carney, who is rolling out the biggest increase in military spending and massive austerity measures. So, there's multiple quotes where they understand that the armed forces need more money, and they agree with that. Mm-hmm. During the election, Mark Carney, as we already mentioned, promised to increase military spending. Justin Trudeau had previously promised to increase military spending by 2%, or by 2032 to 2%. Carney said, I'm going to do it 2 years early. We're going to go to 2% by 2030. Then the NDP came in the election said, well, we're going to just adopt the old Trudeau position.
Yes, 2032.
We stand for increasing to 2%. So also increasing the military budget to the 2% by 2032. This is kind of like if you know the concept of the Overton window. It's the things in mainstream politics that are acceptable you have to adapt yourself to. We think that's absolutely nonsense. And this is a dead end for the left, because basically what they're doing is only adopting the position that was previously a bad position, but now is the most realistic one. So you don't oppose bad things, you accept them just slightly to the left. So they end up being a left cover for the government as they raise military spending and they cut services.
Yeah, and this is why they collapsed so severely in the last election.
Yeah, they're seen as not serious. They don't stand for anything.
To the degree that they're even seen as different from the Liberals at all.
Yeah. So what about the trade unions then?
Yeah, well, I think the different trade unions have said different things, of course. I think a lot of the public sector unions have opposed this because of course they understand that this is at the expense of their members' jobs and so on in the
Well,
public sector.
they're the ones getting laid off.
Exactly, and that's already happening to PSAC, for example, the federal government service union that was on strike quite recently, actually, and could be again later this year. It's one of the biggest unions in the country, and there's already been layoffs in that union. But in the private sector, it's a bit different. I think Unifor is one of the most important, obviously, private sector unions. And it's also one of the most hard hit right now by the trade war because of the crisis of the auto industry as well as other industries like steel. And it means that thousands of their members have been having their plants closed, losing their jobs. There was the shutdown of GM Cami, obviously in Ingersoll, Ontario, the Brampton plant, Stellantis plant also in Ontario. And so this union is obviously under huge threat, but it's a private sector union. So the Unifor had a statement on this, I think it was early this year in January, that said basically their demand is ensure defense spending that supports Canadian industries, revamp defense procurement processes that empower Canadian companies to build the equipment Canada needs to defend its sovereignty.
Right. That could have been written by Donald Trump, or not by Donald Trump, it could have been written by Donald Trump, to be honest, but it could have been written by Mark Carney.
Yeah.
It's the position of the Liberal government. Yeah.
It really could have. If you look at the Prime Minister's office website statement about the defense industrial strategy, it says something extremely similar. The defense industrial strategy is a job strategy. And later, the work of defending Canada is the work of building Canada. Security and prosperity are mutually reinforcing foundations of the true north, strong and free.
Oh my God, okay. So, this is what the left is saying. Unifor also is apparently, I read a bit about this, the GM Cami plant, they are encouraging it to be turned into military production. So it seems like the private sector unions, they're not opposing, I haven't seen any statement from them opposing the massive militarization. We're talking creating hundreds of thousands of reservists, increasing the military personnel, massive militarization and creating of a military industrial complex. It's going to have impacts on Canadian politics. It will be a big lobby there. They're not opposing that because they think maybe we will get some jobs. And even making some suggestions about how they can save some auto plants. What are they going to produce there? Tanks, armored vehicles, maybe.
Yeah.
So this seems to be the position that... So yeah, I do think public sector unions are opposing because they can see that it's directly related to austerity. QP opposed, as far as I'm aware. Unifor, in their statement, said they didn't like the austerity measures. But then they didn't oppose the military spending.
Yeah, exactly.
They kind of agree. They agree with it as long as they get Canadian jobs.
Exactly.
Which is, it's giving a cover for Mark Carney because, as we said at the beginning, they're the ones that are attaching it to so-called jobs and good thing for workers. This is a pro-worker defense industrial strategy. We'll get into that. We'll get into whether or not that's true. But they're allowing them to get away with this massive militarization job by claiming that it's good for working class people. Because most working class people, if you ask them whether or not they want more military jets and tanks and stuff, they would probably not be in favor of that. But if you say, oh, but it's really great for the economy and you're going to get jobs, they'd probably, oh, well, yeah, I like it now. But really what they want is jobs.
Yep, exactly.
So yeah, that's the situation.
Yeah, it fits with their, just to elaborate on this a bit, this has been their strategy in the trade war for a while, Unifor. It's basically proposing that the government's policy be directed in such a way that it helps workers. Yeah. Whether it's the defense strategy, whether it's demanding that the government do something to stop Stellantis moving its plant away from Brampton, which they did a few months ago, and so on. It's basically just asking the government to do something to help the workers. And of course, this means that it spreads the idea that the government can do that or wants to do that or is kind of in the business of serving the workers' interests or anything like that, which I think we've already discussed is not the motivation behind this policy. Yeah, so first things first. So this massive, we're talking hundreds of billions
of government money that's shoveled towards the military. So for starters, maybe you should go through where will most of this money be going?
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing is, does Canada produce fighter jets? Does Canada produce submarines?
Yeah.
Does Canada produce tanks? Does Canada produce a lot of military equipment?
Yeah. Well, I think the starting point, because they're talking about growing the defense industry and all of that, is to understand that right now Canada's defense so-called industry, its war industries, are extremely small. The recent stats are that it accounts for around $10 billion a year in economic activity, which is around 0.1% of GDP.
Yeah.
So it's extremely small. And there's around 80,000 jobs in the arms industries of Canada,
Right.
which is also very small for relative to other industries, although not nothing, of
Yeah.
course. And it's also not a very, technologically advanced arms industry, and it doesn't produce a lot of these things that you mentioned. So this is why, for example, even though Carney's now saying that he wants to buy more Canadian military equipment and advance in this area, they're buying 12 submarines. It hasn't been decided where they're going to buy it from yet, but it's decided that it's not going to be in Canada.
It's South
going
Korea
to be,
or Germany. Yeah.
Exactly, South Korea or Germany.
And that's how much money? 40 billion?
It's up to 40 billion,
Okay,
depending
yeah.
on the estimates. I think 44 billion, according to a certain
Yeah.
Korean newspaper.
Uh-huh.
There's fighter jets Canada does not produce. I think the NDP actually raised the idea that Canada should try to produce them very briefly, when the trade war first started. But they realized that's not possible. But yes, they're buying these from the US, around 28 billion. They also don't produce artillery, really, at least not the advanced artillery. That's 5 billion to the US. Planes, other types of planes, they're spending 10 billion on them. That's to the US. I think you can kind of spot the pattern already, which is that currently 3/4 of Canada's major defense spending is actually just purchases from US companies. And so I think you can say, first of all, is that out of the amount of this money that's just spent on buying equipment, which is a huge part of it, 3/4 currently goes to the US.
Right.
And there's not a clear way to turn that around fast either.
Yeah. So Carney has said that he wants to massively increase the amount of purchases made not from the US, but made specifically in-house from Canadian producers. So he said he wanted to double. I believe it was double. But then I'd ask, still, even under Carney's plan, 50% of the military purchases will be made from America. So half of these hundreds of billions of dollars will be a gift to the American economy.
Yep.
Even under Carney's plan, if it gets put through.
Yes.
So how's that for a waste of money? Hundreds of billion dollars sent to America to purchase arms, and then that will lead to public debt, and they will cut social programs in Canada.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, but what is their defense industrial strategy? So they haven't just said, oh, okay, we're going to waste hundreds of billions of dollars and you'll have to pay for it. Of course, they haven't said that. That would probably lead them to not be in power very long. But they had this idea of, we're going to create Canadian industry and jobs and whatnot.
Yep.
So what is it? Do you want to detail a little bit what the strategy is?
Yeah, I mean, what they want you to believe, again, is as I read the quote, this is a job strategy. This is going to build up Canadian industry. It's going to provide tons of good jobs. I think they say 125,000 over the next decade.
That's in addition to, there's currently the 80,000. So that would be more than
exactly.
doubling the amount of jobs in the defense industry.
Yeah, exactly. So it would put it at around 200,000. They also want to build up different areas of defense industry, so-called defense. They want to use these investments, so-called investments, military purchases to increase the AI industry in Canada, which I think is an absurd idea. You need hundreds of billions of dollars to develop advanced AI.
Yeah.
Canadian capital does not have that amount of money. They
missed the boat on that, it seems.
Yeah, they missed the boat, and it's too small. There's a reason only the U.S. and China are serious competitors in that area. But anyway, the list goes on of these different sort of like specific things they want to invest in. But the main thing is they're saying it will create jobs. It'll be used to also create jobs, what they call downstream. So the military industry will, for example, buy some steel from a Canadian company, and
from
this
like
will protect
Algoma or
steel
whatever.
jobs. Exactly. And the overall picture that emerges is that both the military is going to be, more well-equipped, more well-funded, ready to protect Canada's sovereignty. But also this will be basically a jobs program that will stimulate the economy and help Canada kind of pull itself out of the crisis that it's currently in.
Right, yeah. So I guess I wanted to comment on something first.
Sorry, I forgot to mention one thing. And they actually gave a very specific layout of how they want to spend the money. So yeah, they're going to create some kind of agency to manage the defense spending. That's honestly not very interesting or important. That's just management. But the key points of it are the number one priority is to buy Canadian. The Prime Minister's office statement said buy Canadian is going to be the North Star of this defense industrial strategy. There's a lot of Canadiana literary stuff in there.
Yeah, of course.
And then number two is going to be partner with allies to build it. So it's still going to be a largely Canadian project.
If they can't build it in Canada. Yeah.
Exactly. And then if that's still not possible, they'll try to buy from trusted allies, if on the strong condition that they invest in Canada somehow. And I think we're already seeing this being carried out, obviously, with the submarine deal, where they've tried to convince the South Korean company, I think it's called Hanwha, as well as the German company, I can't remember the name, it doesn't matter, to build car factories in Canada. They were really angling for this and saying, this was our demand, this is what we want, as they were negotiating these deals. So you can see the kind of the strategy at work.
It seems like they refused to do that. We'll see what happens. But
they were rejected, but I think the South Korean car companies said there's no business reason to invest in Canada. And there's a quote from the Volkswagen CEOs that said, where is it? We look at what makes sense for us, Volkswagen. This is his explanation of why they don't want to build a factory in Canada.
So yeah, for that, auto manufacturing in Canada, if you can't have access to the American market, which seems uncertain with Donald Trump, what he's doing, why would you invest in auto production in Canada? All these auto companies are invested in Canada precisely because they get access to not just the Canadian market, which is relatively small, but they get this massive American market that they can sell to. If they can't sell to it, they're not going to invest in Canada. Anyway, that's just one problem with one of the challenges that Canadian capitalism finds itself in with this breakdown with the biggest trading partner. So, yeah, I wanted to make a general comment, I think a general point about the state of Canadian capitalism and how this massive increase in defense spending comes at a really, 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 really bad time. You've had what the banks call an industrial implosion. You've had capital flight out of the Canadian economy. The gap between investment in the Canadian economy and investment leaving the Canadian economy has grown over the last decade and a half, something like that, to about $1 trillion, which means that investors would prefer to invest in other markets. A lot of that is investment in America. The biggest pension funds are overwhelmingly invested in America, not in Canada. These so-called Canadian patriot.
Did you hear what Kevin O'Leary said about this?
What did he say?
He said, well, why would I invest in Canada when I can invest in the U.S.?
Yeah, see, the shrewd...
And he tells the truth, and then he says, yeah, some people tell me that that's selfish, but I'm a capitalist, I'm selfish.
Yeah, no, the shrewd business people, they understand. And they put their money where it's going to make the most profit, not which country. They don't care. The bourgeoisie have no nation, and they're trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the workers to get the workers to support them defending their nation against the other nations. But in terms of where they put their money, they don't want to put it in Canada. So, yes, I've as I explained, there's this industrial implosion. There's a falling productivity of labor, therefore, because the capitalists won't invest in the means of production to increase the productivity of labor. So Canadian capitalism is finding itself increasingly uncompetitive on the world market, right at the point where they can't rely on the U.S. market anymore. So it's a really bad situation. And so what they need to do is they need a massive amount of money, a massive amount of capital to reinvest in the economy, to rationalize production, to increase the productivity of labor, invest in new machinery, in new techniques, to compete, even on a capitalist basis, just to compete with the other powers. And at this time, you have hundreds of billions of state money that they don't have, that's just debt, being spent not on developing production, but on military equipment.
Exactly.
So yeah, I just want to say they are putting forward this argument about how it's going to increase productivity. We'll deal with that in a minute, but I just want to paint the picture of very bad timing.
Yes, exactly.
Very bad timing. The government's already massively in debt. They're having an economic problem, and now they have to spend all this money on military equipment, which is, we'll talk about it in a bit, going to act as a big drain.
Yes.
So,
I think that. Go ahead.
go ahead. I think I'm done.
Well, I think this, what you mentioned about productivity is demonstrated with the military industries.
Yeah.
Because one of the biggest problems they face is even if they start getting private companies to invest a little bit, produce a little bit more, as the strategy says, the only way this can work is if they have other powers buying Canadian military products.
Yep.
Even then, I would argue it won't work, but that would at least be a step in the right direction from the point of view of the government, of course. But the problem is, how are you going to compete with the U.S., which has obviously very developed, military industrial complex? How are you going to compete with the European companies? How can you compete with South Korea, with Germany? The list can, of course, go on. Like, how can you develop an industry that's actually productive enough that other countries will want what you're selling? Because it's at a price that they, find appealing, basically. This is the fundamental problem that they will struggle to overcome, just as they're struggling to overcome it in every other industry, of course. Mining, for example, obviously.
Yeah, so they're in a bit of a pickle here. Part of the defense industrial strategy, as you mentioned, is to make this defense investment agency where they're going to invest state money, so corporate subsidies, to develop private industry producing arms. They have, as Mark Carney does, he's tapped his Goldman Sachs buddy, Doug Guzman. They have all these Goldman Sachs people. He's heading up that investment agency, and he's going to look at it in a very shrewd manner of how they can invest this money to get arms manufacturing going. And the goal is to turn Canada into, Carney said, and he always has these phrases that when you look at it, it seems a bit ridiculous, turn Canada into an export powerhouse, meaning that Canada will have a massive military industrial complex. They'll produce military arms and sell them to countries all over the world so they can kill each other.
Exactly.
And that's their plan for the Canadian economy.
Exactly.
But I think it runs into the problem, even if you take it on its own terms, which I don't agree with, is Canada will have to compete with all these other countries that are doing the same thing. And yes, Canada is less competitive.
Yep.
So yes, because if you look at it, it's hard to get investors or businesses to invest in Canada to produce military equipment just for Canada. It doesn't make that much sense. But if you can get them to produce stuff that then they can sell to other countries, that's where it makes sense. So I guess the question is, their whole argument is this is going to have, maybe we can move on to the next point here. This is going to have an economic impact. It's going to create 125,000 jobs. It's going to drive hundreds of billions of investment in the Canadian economy, and it's going to kind of kickstart the economy. It's going to get it going again. We're going to use the military spending to do that. But is that going to work?
Yeah.
Maybe we can go on to that point.
For sure. Well, it's certainly can have a short-term effect that can be, you could say, positive in a way. You can find lots of economists writing articles about this, that there's many examples of a country's military spending temporarily boosting the economy. This is what happened that helped extend the boom after the Second World War. and so on. So it can certainly have a temporary effect, and there's no use denying that because that's true. But I think we need to look at the long-term effects. And what are the long-term effects on the working class, on the economy, which is obviously behind the conditions of the working class.
Sorry, before we get into that, can we go into why would it have a short-term effect? Maybe if we just spell it out for people.
Yeah, well, it's basically a massive, just an injection of a bunch of money into the economy. So it means, first of all, that there'll be workers just getting money who might
be getting hired to work in arms production.
They might work in the arms industries. They might be in the military. Like military people will have more money, is what I mean, and there will be more of them. So you have an injection into the pockets of more ordinary people.
You will increase the consumer market, who will then buy products. Yeah,
exactly. So then they buy products, and this is just simply a boost to the economy. And it's also an injection into the pockets of companies. As well, through the corporate handouts that are involved, obviously, in this plan, which they may use to hire more people if it happens to be profitable, or at a minimum, it just raises their profits in one way or another. Right. And so it can have like a limited and temporary economic benefit, as lots of these studies obviously describe.
Yeah, that would be similar to if the government just rolled out a couple $100 billion to build roads and hospitals.
Yeah.
That would have an impact in a positive economic impact in the sense that people would get jobs and there would be an economic effect in the economy at large.
Should we go on to the other effects?
Yeah. So, okay, it could potentially have, they're shoveling hundreds of billions of dollars at this. And they're going to try to create jobs in Canada doing this. I saw with the sub purchase with South Korea, for example, they were like negotiating them opening a hydrogen fuel cell plant or something.
South Korea says if they get the contract, they'll build like a hydrogen fuel cell facility or something.
Okay.
And they say that between this fuel cell facility, between the construction of the submarine maintenance facilities, between everything involved, it'll be around 25,000 jobs per year.
I'm kind of doubtful of that number.
That's South Korea's opinion.
Maybe in the construction, of course, they have an interest in boosting their case, but maybe in the construction phase. What happens quite often with a lot of these projects, in the construction phase, there's lots of jobs, but then once the construction is done, there isn't that many jobs.
Exactly. So
it doesn't have a long-term effect. But anyway, this is just to give an idea of the type of thing that's being discussed here. But we can move on to the second part. But okay, if it could have a short-term impact, well, isn't this going to work then? Where's the downside?
Yeah. Well, I think this was there's this opinion piece. It was like a letter to the editor in the Financial Times 6 months ago or so that said, permanent arms economy used to be a Marxist idea. Now it's mainstream. It was some title like that.
Yeah.
The content isn't that interesting, but it's alluding to a real debate that existed in the Marxist movement during the post-war boom in the 70s and the 80s, which was what is the effect of arms spending on the economy, short-term but also long-term. And there was defenders of this idea called the permanent arms economy, which said exactly this, that through arms spending, the government can stimulate the economy, just keep it, basically get rid of the contradictions of capitalism that put it into crisis, and you can have basically economic stability forever. And so the founder of Our International, Ted Grant, analyzed this in detail at the time and responded to this idea, which, I think is completely false, basically. But you see how this idea has gone mainstream, obviously, with what Carney's saying, with what the European leaders are saying, and so on. So, I mean, I think...
what did Ted say about this?
Yeah, so he analyzed this from a few directions. Just to add one thing first, also, this peace dividend, it's no accident that the best performing economies after World War II were the ones that had the lowest military spending. Japan, Germany, and so on. Yeah,
because they could dedicate the capital to actual production in the real economy instead of plowing hundreds of billions of dollars into military expenditure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the effect of military spending in a longer term way is it's similar to any other kind of unproductive spending. In this way, it's like a type of Keynesianism,
Yeah.
where the government spends money to boost the economy, create jobs, and so on. But the thing is, yeah, it's unproductive in the sense that the spending is used to produce military equipment,
Yeah.
these types of things that are either stockpiled or used and then destroyed, or whatever it is. But in no way does that process actually cause an increase in like the general productivity of the economy into an investment in the production of things that are actually socially useful for the economy.
Yeah.
So for example, if the government spent a bunch of money building a road, that is actually useful for the economy. It helps the transport of goods and so on. Whereas with military spending, it's in no way useful to the economy as a whole.
Most of the
And so
weapons
it's kind of
just end up being stockpiled.
exactly.
Not
Or
used.
if they are used, they're just destroyed.
Well, they're also used to destroy.
And to destroy, exactly. And so it's almost like putting the money into a black hole. If you gave the money to the U.S. companies, it's obviously into a black hole. But even if it's in the military industry in Canada, the end product is not economically useful in any way, unlike in productive industries that produce a commodity that's sold and creates like an incentive to advance production and advance the economy. So I think this is the basics, is that it's unproductive.
So what's the likely result of this? So they may get away because no one's really opposing this. No mainstream for.
Yeah.
Looks like they may get away if they can. They might be able to attract some investment on certain things, and create some more arms industries in Canada. Maybe, to be honest, the NATO association actually in that article that I was quoting earlier. They give the warning that you might not be able to get away with this because of all these other problems. And they said it could just end up being another costly political experiment.
Yes.
Because actually they're not sure that Canada will be able to thread the needle and develop a defense industry, but with competing with the world and everything else.
Yes.
But say they do. Maybe there's a short-term boost. There's tens of thousands of jobs created. Possible, potentially. I don't know. We don't have a crystal ball.
Right.
But so obviously Carney's saying, oh, well, that's just going to be great because you'll have the whole economy will be revived, right?
Yeah.
And we'll build the strongest economy in the G7. That's what Carney said. But what's the downside of this?
Yeah. So the fact that it's unproductive, that's one side of the equation, right?
Yeah.
Because an economy advances when it becomes more productive, when its wealth is spent on advancing production. And the fact that productivity is going backwards is really the whole crisis of Canadian capitalism in a nutshell, right? And why no one invests and so on. Or it's the result of the lack of investment, but it also feeds into it. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is that someone has to pay for it, obviously. We've discussed already who's going to pay for it. But regardless, it's an absolutely massive amount of money. And it has to be paid basically by taxes. Yeah. So on the more general economic side, this means you can tax the rich, tax the capitalists, which means you're cutting into their profits, which lowers their incentive to invest in production. So again, it's enhancing the productivity problem. And because the government wants to, of course, they want to advance investment, not decrease it. They're trying to serve the interests of the capitalists. They're absolutely not going to do this. The other option is that the working class pays for it through taxes or through austerity or whatever it is.
Seems like they're going that route.
Exactly. Yeah. But this means less money in the pockets of the working class, which means obviously demand is cut down. Yeah. And so even though it can temporarily stimulate some demand, the long-term effect is actually a reduction in demand, which is obviously reduces, again, the incentive to invest in production. And you could say, well, maybe those two factors balance out. Maybe the extra demand from the spending it balances out the lower demand from the working class or whatever. But the thing is, again, a huge part of all the effort and wealth that's put into this military stuff is used for nothing, for a useless thing that just sits in stockpile. And so it's not like balanced out. A bunch of it is just sent into a black hole.
I also think it doesn't balance. There's no balancing. Even if that was without even addressing that black hole point that you made, Carney is laying off 40,000 to begin federal employees who are people with good union jobs and benefits, who are consumers in the market, right? And he's promising to create $120,000, $25,000 jobs in the military sector sometime down the road. And so the money he saved from the 40,000 is very minuscule.
Yeah.
It's not that much. And they're shoveling hundreds of billions to create how many jobs? So I would actually maybe...
It's 125,000.
Somebody, maybe we will, should add up the amount... At a certain point, there's going to be a big picture number of the amount of money they're spending on the military over the next 10 years or whatever, and compare it to the number of jobs created. Yes. I bet you the amount spent per job gotten out is going to be enormous.
Yes.
It's going to be absolutely enormous. And so what you could say is, well, why'd you cut the public sector job? If this is about jobs, you should have put it into something else. Or I would say nationalize the auto sector, produce cars and and transit lines and things that we need. You'll produce useful things for society and create good jobs. And it probably is a better bang for your buck. So I thought of that. I think it's a bit... This idea that this is how you're going to create jobs and productivity in the real economy is wishful thinking at best. Yeah,
I did some calculations on some of that actually. Just to say one other thing about my general explanation. The result of all this is basically inflation, because you have no decrease in the money supply, you're increasing the money supply. There's more money going around in the economy.
Oh, because the government's taking on debt. They have to get the money from, I guess, printing money or borrowing it.
They're gifting it to corporations. It's going in the pockets of workers and all of that.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you're not advancing production through the spending of that money.
Yeah.
And so those the exact conditions that creates inflation. So this is what you saw at the end of the post-war boom, which had been prolonged by military spending. And then in the 1970s, inflation rate hits 10%, basically. And we can easily see that again, especially considering the current events in Iran. So that's a massive blow to the living standards of the working class. But about the statistics. So we can't see the future. Maybe this will be a little different than in the past. But the government does publish very precise statistics on their national shipbuilding program.
Yeah.
And a lot of what they're doing now is a continuation of that program, like the building of the icebreakers, the building of the destroyers, which are being built in Canada, in Canadian
Canada
shipyards.
Does build ships.
Exactly. So these things, the icebreakers and destroyers, are actually the kind of defense industrial strategy ideal. That's exactly what they want, right? And it's the continuation of the national shipbuilding strategy. Now, this national shipbuilding strategy, which is about building ships in Canada for the military, between 2012 and 2022, they spent $21 billion on this program.
It's a lot of money.
Exactly. The government itself estimates that this supported about 20,000 jobs a year and added about 2.3 billion to GDP per year. So that's around 0.1% of GDP. And it's, where is it? First of all, I had an exact amount, I apologize.
It's okay.
$105,000 per job.
Okay.
Whereas, if you want a comparison, Canada Post, which obviously is constantly under attack, the workers are constantly under attack.
There's no money.
There's no money. The Industrial Inquiry Commission into Canada Post said that Canada Post is facing an existential crisis. It's effectively insolvent or bankrupt. Well, I would say the shipbuilding strategy is definitely insolvent and bankrupt then, because Canada Post lost around $15,000 per job. Yeah. So it's the government spending $15,000 per very good union job, obviously, at Canada Post. Meanwhile, around $100,000 per job was spent by the national shipbuilding strategy. Right. So I think these are obviously just a few statistics, but it shows how insanely inefficient this spending has been in the past from an economic point of view.
Yeah.
And I don't see any clear reason to expect that it will become more efficient, to be honest, for the reasons we've already discussed.
If anything, it'll be less efficient. Yeah.
So it's a fantasy, really, that in the long term this will benefit the economy. It means austerity, it means inflation, it means at the end of the day massive cuts to the living standards of the working class, and really nothing good for the working class. So this is why at the end of the day communists oppose this.
Yeah, so either way, they're going to make the working class pay, whether it's through cuts to social services, and because they not only had increased inflation in the 70s, they also had stagflation. So,
which they've been raising
I
lately.
personally think that Carney's not going to be able to pull this off, and that the economy won't even get the short-term benefits, that this will be a massive waste of money, and it will be a massive drag on the real economy, because at the point where they need to be spending money to develop productivity of labor in the real economy, they will be funneling loads of money into an unproductive sector that will act as a drag on the economy as they cut the consumer market with massive public sector, not just the 40,000 laid off federally. In BC, they're laying off 15,000. In provinces across the country that are coming out with their budgets, there are layoffs and there are cuts to grants to services that basically is taking money out of the consumer market that will make consumers buy less, that will mean Canadian businesses in the real economy will sell less, and they will have to close shop. And then there will be job losses there. So I think it's a very tenuous balancing act they have. And that working class people are going to have to pay. There'll be rising inflation. I think there's going to be rising inflation either way. And that the economy will stagnate or even enter recession, partially because of the military spending, because the real economy is not being developed. They're just shoveling the money down a black hole. In the best case scenario, this will be massively inflationary, and it will cause other problems down the line for the Canadian economy too. So, and it will just kind of increase the sluggishness of the Canadian economy. So yes, this is why we shouldn't support this. If you're interested, if you like this podcast, I encourage you to get your copy of Communist Revolution, the latest issue of Communist Revolution, Overthrow the Epstein Class, has a back cover on the question of war and imperialism. It's about the Iran war. And the issue before, we had Down with Mask Off Imperialism, the New World Order. So yeah, get your copy of Communist Revolution, subscribe to it. We'll put a link in the notes, in the description for the episode. You can read more of our analysis on this question and other questions. But yeah, this is an extremely important question. And as we've highlighted here, the trade unions, the NDP, I think a lot of people in society are actually relatively confused about this issue. And the benefit of Marxism is that we can cut through that confusion, give a clear explanation of this to help people understand what this means. And down the road, when it becomes clear to people, oh, that was really bad. We shouldn't have supported that. This was horrible. Carney was selling us out, corporate bastard, people will look for us. They'll look for communists to give them those explanations. But yeah, if you're listening to this, if you've already been concerned about the military spending and we help you make sense of it, please subscribe to our paper. And yes, please subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is the Class Line. This is the podcast of the Revolutionary Communist Party. We are the party that is fighting to prepare for the socialist revolution in Canada. Eventually, this isn't just an academic discussion. Eventually, all of these things will hit workers in their living standards. Working class people are already starting to wake up and rise up and fight back. We will have revolution in our lifetimes, and we are preparing for that. So please reach out to us. Please join the Revolutionary Communist Party and help us build the party of the future.